everyone. This is Joe Riggio, your host with Socially Joe, and in this episode 33, yes, I can't believe I'm on 33 already, but I am joined by my guest, Marlene SIMONS, who is here, and we're going to talk about a little bit about her book, what inspired her to write her book, all this lovely stuff. But before I get too involved in this, I'm going to bring Marlene into the show right now. So welcome, Marlene, to Socially Joe. Give us a little brief bio about yourself.
Okay, the first thing I want to say is it's Marlene SIMONS with one M. So a lot of people do that, but that's fine. I have been working with parents and teachers and families and schools for many, many years. And when I moved to Florida, I wrote a book called If Only They Came with Instructions, A Guide for Parents. And since that time, I have watched what's been happening in the world, and I decided it was time to write Nobody's Perfect, Parenting in a World of Change. So that's where I am now. I just launched my second book yesterday, and I'm working on that now. So that is really the focus of what I'd like to talk about and why I wrote the book.
Awesome. Great. I can't wait. So I know you gave me a little bit brief bio about your book, Nobody's Perfect, but what inspired you to write about this, about Nobody's Perfect?
Well, excuse me. When I moved to Florida, which was a number of years ago, I had just written my other book, and the job I found was as Director of Success by Six. It was a $50 million initiative by Publix. And that investment was made because there was a huge amount of early childhood research about the developing brain. And all of a sudden, it became possible through PET scans to really look into the brain of a living person as opposed to wait until they were died and do an autopsy. So it was incredible in the world of early childhood as well as in people who are studying things like dementia. So when I saw that kind of research, I was very, very excited. And then in the ensuing years, working on that initiative, in the ensuing years, very disappointed to see that on a state level and on a federal level, all of the public policy related to education and early childhood went in the exact opposite direction of what the brain research indicated and what all the early childhood experts were saying. So that was one of the things that really triggered me to begin writing again about the issues. And specifically for parents, I really wanted to focus on where things go wrong. I had seen more than 2,000 parents in my parenting groups, and it was really across the spectrum, the economic and cultural spectrum. And what I found was things started to go wrong at about 18 months to 2 years old. And the reason that happened was because children at that stage of development have enormous developed language capacity. They're talking in sentences, and they appear to understand a lot of things. They can certainly express a lot of things. On the other hand, their emotional development, which is about their impulse control, is very limited. So you have children who know what they're supposed to do but can't quite control their impulses. A simple example is a kid who knows they're not supposed to write on the wall with their crayon, but they have the crayon on their hand and it's a big white wall. And even though they know they're not supposed to intellectually, they just can't stop that impulse yet. They don't have the impulse control. And how parents interpret that is often, my child doesn't listen to me, my child doesn't respect me, she's just trying to push my buttons. And what happens is the parent gets angry at the child for not having the emotional development that equals their verbal development, their intellectual development. And so the trajectory of an angry parent with a child who really is not able to control all their impulses at that point it begins a downward trajectory for that relationship. And often it becomes adversarial for an ongoing period of time. So that is one of the things that really I wanted parents to understand, that when children are at that stage of development, they're talking in sentences. They may be very clear about a lot of things, but they don't necessarily have the emotional development to actually stop themselves from doing what they're not supposed to do. And when parents understand that, it provides such a different view. They don't get angry at the child. They learn how to help the child develop ways to do it better the next time, which is basically just helping the child, guiding the child physically, rather than yelling at the child, repeating yourself over and over again, or hitting, which is still used by about 63% of parents of 2 to 4-year-olds. So those are the things that really concerned me and were very powerful in motivating me to write this book.
Okay. So you did devote a whole chapter of your book to stories and conversations with just 4-year-olds. Why?
I did. I think 4-year-olds are fascinating. And one of the reasons is because they have such incredible language development, and they really can tell you things very honestly. They're not really inhibited in any ways. And what I love about that is that you get to really understand how they see the world. And there are so many different stories I have. One of them that was interesting to me was a little girl who was 4 years old, and it was a Head Start program. It was in Massachusetts, and I was called in to take the place of someone who had been fired at kind of the last minute because she hadn't been very responsible. And this little girl asked me, why isn't Miss Diana here? Why are you here instead of her? And I thought, well, I can't really explain this to her very well. So I just said, well, it's kind of complicated. And her response was, well, okay, just tell me half, which is a perfect example of how 4-year-olds are concrete thinkers. They don't have the ability to think in abstract terms. So it was like, okay, well, just tell me half. And then the second conversation I had with her was that she had her shoes on the wrong feet. And I said, Stacy, your shoes are on the wrong feet. And she looked down at her feet, and she looked up at me like I was an idiot and said, no, they're my feet. And so we use language differently as adults. And 4-year-olds not only think concretely, but also think about things in a way that we're not always aware of. And so we make assumptions about that they understand us, or they're just doing this to get us upset as parents. And so that's one of the reasons I devoted the book. Aside from it's just a bunch of stories that I enjoyed, another one was at a friend's wedding, who her brother came to the wedding with his 4-year-old, and his wife did not come because they had a new baby at home. And I was engaging the 4-year-old in conversation, and after we talked for a while, I said, I understand you have a brand new brother. What's his name? And he thought for a minute, and he said, be careful, which is obviously what everybody was saying to him all the time when he was near his little brother. So sometimes we expect more from children that age, and sometimes we're surprised at the amazing capacity that they have to engage with us and to express themselves. So that was one of the reasons. I just wanted to provide one glimpse, one age. And each age really has its own perspective, whether you're talking about this age of 2 to 4-year-olds when they are really beginning to develop a sense of who they are and how they will move forward in the world. That often, if those issues are not dealt with very effectively, in the 2 to 4-year-old age, which I'm going to refer to Erik Erikson, who's a very famous psychologist who talked about emotional development of children. And he talked about at that stage of development, children are either motivated by a sense of autonomy and integrity about, I'm okay, I can move myself forward in the world, or they're motivated by shame and doubt. Kids who are hurt and humiliated, children who are not guided but punished hurtfully. And what happens, I found, is that if those issues are not resolved successfully in that 2 to 4-year-old stage, they erupt in 12 to 14-year-olds. The same issues, only they come in big bodies with raging hormones. So the importance of parents really being able to pay attention and to address those kind of issues early is very important to me.
Nice. So you kind of hinted near the end, but what are the most important things that for parents to know about raising their children? Because we all know that raising kids can be difficult challenges for certain groups. So what's the most important thing for parents to know this?
I would say that another place other than misunderstanding kind of where children are in their stage of development is the deep confusion we have between discipline and punishment. And discipline comes from the Latin, and it means to teach. And that is really what discipline should be about. When parents use hurtful and humiliating punishments, it really doesn't help children to do it better the next time. And there are lots of good strategies. Some of them I talk about in the book, and there are lots of other resources about healthy discipline and helping children to develop their own impulse control and their sense of self-discipline, because that's really what we want. I mean, we're given a brand new baby who's totally dependent on us for every need, and we're expected at the end of 18 years to have an individual who is capable socially and in the physical world, and who is respectful and cooperative, and who may not be have reached that level of sophistication on all those levels by the time they're 18, but we are expected to help our children grow into those people. And how do we do that? How do we teach children how to listen and how to be respectful? And we do that really by example. And that's hard to do if you're upset with your young child and you're angry and you don't have a lot of impulse control yourself. So helping parents to look back at how they were parented was what I always used to start parenting groups, because if we don't really have any perspective on how we were parented, it's hard for us to be conscious about what we're doing. So when parents are able to look back and say, these are the things that I liked about how I was a parent, how I was parented, and these are the things I disliked, then it's a lot easier for them to begin making choices about what I want to do differently with my children. And for people who get angry very easily and strike out verbally or physically, that requires a whole other level of training. And parents have to be willing to kind of look at themselves that way and be willing to learn some new skills. And what I found in the parents that I worked with, and I worked with a very diverse group as one of the organizations I worked with across